We operate our daily lives on a basic assumption of geography. We believe that dangerous individuals are securely confined to bad environments, prisons, holding cells, or abandoned outskirts. And as long as we stay out of those places, our personal bubbles remain perfectly intact. Sometimes normal routines break down. You take a wrong turn, you explore a dilapidated building on a dare, you make a stupid mistake that lands you in a county holding cell for the weekend. These are collision points, brief, accidental intersections with the penal system or its dark periphery. A normal person experiences this intersection as an anomaly to escape as quickly as possible. To a predator, these moments of overlap provide the specific data points needed to begin a pursuit. By analyzing 3 specific accounts, we can map the behavioral patterns used to bridge the gap between a brief encounter and a private home. We'll dissect how a few minutes of proximity can be leveraged to track a victim back into their real life. What these accounts prove is that physically leaving a bad location does not guarantee your safety. The true danger lies in the methodical ways a predator can track you out of the shadows and follow you straight into your normal life. Our first scenario begins with 2 young women, Laura and the narrator, who decided to go urban exploring. At 1 in the morning, they trespassed into a massive, decaying prison that had been abandoned for decades. Deep inside the collapsing structure, a man stepped out of the darkness. He introduced himself as Mike and immediately claimed to be the building's security guard. He spoke smoothly, confidently telling them he was supposed to detain trespassers and call the police, taking total control of the interaction. This chart maps out a psychological trap known as forced compliance. When a predator adopts the role of a predator or official, they establish a node of perceived authority. This triggers our ingrained societal habit of obedience, which forces the victim downward into a state of total compliance. The predator then uses that obedience to funnel the target directly into isolation. You can see how Mike applies this exact structure. By dangling the threat of law enforcement, he maintains his false authority. He then offers to let the women go with a warning, provided they follow him out through a safer back route. He is physically herding them deeper into the maze, eventually stopping at a pitch-black basement staircase. The trap finally snaps when Laura refuses to walk down into the dark. Realizing his verbal commands are failing, Mike reaches out and physically grabs the narrator's arm to force her down the stairs. The illusion breaks instantly, forcing the women to shove him away and sprint out of the building in a blind panic. Local police later confirmed there was no security detail at that site. Mike wore the disguise of the system because weaponizing a victim's instinct to obey an authority figure is far more effective and requires much less effort than trying to ambush them in the dark. The second scenario shifts to a highly controlled environment. An 18-year-old was arrested for shoplifting a phone from Walmart and forced to spend 48 hours in a county jail waiting to see a judge. He was placed in a cell with a man in his 40s who went by the name Bob. Bob used the cramped confines of the cell to gather intelligence. Sitting uncomfortably close on the bottom bunk, he pressed the terrified teenager for conversational breadcrumbs, asking where he lived, what school he went to, and who he lived with. The teen gave vague answers, desperately trying to keep to himself until he was released. But those vague answers were enough. Days after the teen went home, Bob found his public Instagram profile, sent a direct message with a selfie from a dark room, and then showed up in a car outside the teenager's house, rattling both the front and back doorknobs. This digital network web shows exactly how a systemic exploit works. When an individual is processed through the justice system, a central node is created in the form of a public booking record. A predator released shortly after their target simply searches the local jail's public registry, matches the physical description and date, and extracts the legal name, which directly points to social media profiles and home addresses. Armed with that data, the predator can seamlessly breach the victim's private life. Later that week, Bob tracked the teenager down yet again, sitting silently at the far end of a dive bar just to stare at him. The open source data allows the predator to zero in on their target anywhere in the real world. The physical walls of the holding cell provided zero protection. The digital footprint generated by a single minor arrest produces a permanent map, giving a total stranger the exact coordinates they need to follow you home. Our final scenario involves a corrections officer who moved 1,000 miles across the country for a new job at a local jail. There, he routinely interacted with an inmate named Edgar, a parole violator who was consistently respectful and never stepped out of line. Then, Edgar began dropping impossible details into their conversations. He casually asked how the officer's brother Stan was doing. Days later, he asked if the officer's mother Diana still lived by the lake. The officer had no social media, and Edgar had zero access to the internet or outside communication. This tactic is defined as asymmetric warfare. A predator acquires highly personal, impossible-to-know data and strategically deploys it to strip the victim of their perceived control. Months after Edgar was released, that power imbalance was weaponized in the real world. At 2 a.m, the officer's doorbell camera captured Edgar standing entirely motionless on his front porch. When the officer finally spoke through the camera, Edgar simply smiled, claimed he was walking around selling meat out of a truck, and then slowly vanished into the night on foot. Edgar never attempted physical violence. He didn't break a window or pick a lock. He simply materialized at the officer's house, and weeks later, outside the officer's girlfriend's house. The mere act of omnipresent stalking completely inverted their relationship, stripping the guard of his safety and acting as a pure display of dominance. The objective of asymmetric stalking is rarely an immediate physical attack. It is about creating a permanent sense of being watched, forcing the victim to realize that no matter where they go, the predator's presence is a fixed part of their reality. Every victim in these 3 accounts physically survived their encounter. They escaped the abandoned prison, they got out of jail, and they locked their front doors. Yet the psychological damage remained severe, dictating where they went, how they slept, and who they trusted for years afterward. That lasting trauma stems from the realization that the physical and digital barriers we rely on can be bypassed by anyone with the right set of predatory tools. As this diagram illustrates, predators can bypass these boundaries through 3 distinct vectors. They leverage the illusion of authority to force compliance, exploit open-source booking data to build digital maps, and deploy impossible knowledge to establish psychological dominance. Operating safely in the modern world requires recognizing that a locked physical door is no longer a complete defense. Guarding your personal data, remaining deeply skeptical of chance encounters, and recognizing the early signs of forced compliance are the only ways to secure your perimeter. Predators don't need to live in your neighborhood to reach you. They only need a single point of contact to attach themselves to your routine, waiting for the right moment to emerge from the periphery.